Hi, everybody. It's Mike from Here the Watchmen. And tonight on the Watchmen's Report, we have none other than Alexander Lawrence. Alexander Lawrence is Watchman Alexander. He has some wonderful, wonderful discussions about the rapture, all kinds of great stuff that just, it's eye-opening. He's been on our show before. We want to have him come back about once every couple of weeks to continue the series on what the signs are that you can really watch for. Alexander, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me here. It's good to be back.
Well, we certainly appreciate it. I want to start the show off tonight because it leads into some of the topics that we're going to talk about. Let's talk about your book, Leviathans, Ruse. And what I'd like to do is just give us a little breakdown about that and where it leads us.
Sure. Well, Leviathan's Ruse is meant to be a comprehensive guide to the battle that's going on in the spiritual realm between good and evil. And I'm taking an eagle's eye view of everything. I'm not getting down into the micro details like some other people do, going into helping out with those who have been involved in the occult, doing spiritual warfare, battling the demonic forces. That's awesome stuff. I have not gone into that. What I've tried to do is take a macro view and explain what's been happening from the very beginning of history to the very end in the kingdom of darkness, because I think that it's really important for us to understand the strategy and the tactics of our enemy. Because if we don't know what he's doing and what he's having his folks doing in his kingdom, then it's going to be very difficult for us to identify those things in the world around us and to not participate, not get pulled into them, and to actually fight them spiritually. So I'm going to go a little bit into what our lives need to look like in order to combat the forces of darkness in the second volume of Leviathan's Ruse, which I'm writing right now. I haven't finished it, but in the first volume, I'm really just taking a look at the strategy and what he's implemented, he being Leviathan, or Satan, the fallen dragon, from the beginning of history, and also the cosmocrators, which are under the class of fallen angels, and what they're up to and how they're cooperating with Satan. So
wow.
There's a lot of different threads that I have to tie together. I've tried to take it from ground zero because not everybody is going to have the background to understand a lot of this stuff if I just dove right into it. So I needed to, I try to condense things as much as possible and get through them really quickly, but also to touch on all of the basics so that the reader is going to know by the time we get into more of the meat of the book, where all this is coming from. So I start off talking about why should we care about these things. Then I go into the angelic realm. What are the immortals or the heavenly beings? What classes of those do we know about from the scriptures? And what's going on with Satan, or the adversary? How did he fall? What's he doing now? How is he tied in with Leviathan, which is actually a mascot for him? And then his kingdom, and why it's called the Beast Kingdom, and how it really began at Babel. And the cosmocrators, when they decided to take the same route as Satan and try and do things their own way, and they are now at odds with God and involved in what I call a class action lawsuit against God. And how the occult, the mystery schools or the mystery religions, have been working throughout history to carry out the plan of Satan and to some extent the cosmocrators to get us to an end game, which is almost a utopian society without God. They're trying to bring us back to Atlantis, because they started it previously, early in history, and God put an end to it. And then they started trying again right after the flood, and God put an end to that again at Babel. And they continue to try and get at this from different angles. And in the end, they're going to succeed once more in uniting the world, bringing everyone back under one umbrella like it was early on, and increasing our knowledge, which is happening now, to a point to which we believe we can be gods. We can be like God, the promise that Satan gave in the garden. He's trying to deliver on that. And of course, he's never going to be able to oust God, the Most High Elohim, but he's giving us a false sense that can happen. He's trying to give us, he's going to give us an imposter who will be like the Messiah. He will be the anti-Messiah, who's going to be the crowning achievement in this quest towards the utopia. He'll be the capstone on top of the pyramid. You know, in the back of your dollar bill, how it has that unfinished pyramid with the all-seeing eye on the top? Well, that all-seeing eye is representative of Satan and his guy, the king of Babylon. So I know who that is. He's going to try and install him again at the end of time to be the king over the whole world. He's going to succeed for a short time. And then, of course, God will send the Messiah back to finish all this up and get rid of evil entirely at the climax of it all.
So, Alexander, would you say that nearly our entire modern way of life is instituted by the occultists?
Yes, and that's a pretty incredible statement for a lot of people who have not been looking into these things. I wouldn't have believed it several years ago myself, but these days, having looked into the real history of the world, you know, what's been going on with powerful people and powerful organizations behind the scenes, and right under our noses a lot of times. Like I said, there's symbolism on the dollar bill, on the Great Seal of the United States. They're actually announcing their plan. They're telling you what they're doing. And we had no idea because it's in these symbols that don't make any sense to us. They're esoteric. But once you understand the symbolism, once you understand where all these things came from, you start to see it everywhere. And especially going to places of government, the central zones of the ruling bodies, like Washington, D.C., like Paris, like London, you're going to see the occult symbols and their plan encoded everywhere in the architecture, especially in the architecture, because Masonry is really one of the ways that the mystery religion has been carried on. But you'll see it in the artwork. You're going to see it in the ancient monuments that they've set up there. So you just have to know what to look for. And that's what I try to do in Leviathans Ruse, is open people's eyes to these things. You know, what is it exactly that they are telling us in an encoded way, so that we can, you know, be aware and not get snookered by it. But
Wow.
Let me actually read you a couple of quotes, if you don't mind, that will
Absolutely
give you a good idea of how the occultists are thinking. This is from Manly P. Hall. He was a high degree Freemason, and he did a lot of research into occult writings of all types, going back centuries. And this is a couple of things that he had to say in his book, The Secret Destiny of America. He says, one of the most ancient of man's constructive ideals is a dream of a commonwealth of states. The mechanism for this accomplishment of this ideal was set in motion in the ancient temples of Greece, Egypt, and India. Not only must we preserve that which we have gained through ages of striving, we must also perfect the plan of the ages, setting up here in America the machinery for a world brotherhood of nations and races. This is our duty and our glorious opportunity. Okay, well, that doesn't sound too terrible, right? We like terms like brotherhood and commonwealth and unity, right? Except that God didn't want us to have that in the world at this time because we're corrupt. So he knew that by coming together, as we did at the Tower of Babel, instead of dispersing like he told us to, that we would magnify the wickedness of man, and we would use the increase of knowledge to do exceedingly horrible things. So he didn't want that. He wanted us to spread out. So what they're doing flies right in the face of God's plan for us in wanting to unite us again. Okay, then he says, years of research among the records of olden peoples available in libraries, museums, and shrines of ancient culture has convinced me that there exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. It is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization has a secret destiny. Secret, I say, because this high purpose is not realized by the many. The great masses of people still live along without any knowledge whatsoever that they are part of a universal motion in time and space. And then later he says, in ancient days, all learning was regarded as sacred. Wisdom was entrusted to the keeping of priest philosophers, and they were permitted to communicate the choicest branches of the sciences only to duly initiated pupils, to bestow knowledge upon those who had not prepared their minds by years of self-discipline and self-purification, profaned the mysteries, and desecrated the sacred sciences. And then he gives the real key here. There is a second birth, which is not an accident. It is the consequence of a proper intent. By this second birth, man is born enlightened by enlightened intelligence, out of a nation and out of a race into an international nation and an international race. It is this larger and coming race that will someday inherit the earth. But unless a man be born again by enlightenment, he shall not be a part of the philosophic empire. And having read the writings of many other occultists like Mr. Hall, I understand that he is correct. This is the idea in the mystery or occult religions. And they use a lot of the same language that Christians use, right? Being born again, coming into this new state of light, a new being of light. And a lot of that is not by accident. They're intentionally using that kind of terminology, but what they've done is flipped it on its head. The entire story of the Bible, actually, they flip it upside down. And what they say is that Lucifer, or actually Satan, I think Lucifer is the king of Babylon, but in their terminology, or in popular Christian terminology, Lucifer, or the light bearer in the garden, when he offered this knowledge, this hidden knowledge to Adam and Eve, he was actually doing them a favor. This is what the occultists say. They think that he was trying to elevate them because the one who could created them, Yahweh or Yahovah, he was actually a repressive God, and he was trying to keep them controlled and keep them ignorant. And so the occultists think Satan is actually the hero who came along and tried to rescue us from this terrible oppressive God who was going to keep us in darkness forever. So their idea of light is the tree of knowledge. They want us to have the fullness of that fruit of knowledge, not only a moral knowledge, being able to decide for ourselves good from evil, but also the knowledge of the heavenlies, the secret knowledge that the angels, or immortals, I should say, had, but humankind was not given. And so the progress from that time has been up and down in terms of how much knowledge we have, but steadily climbing, even though there have been some hills and valleys. In the world before the flood, we know from books like Enoch, Jubilees, and others that, and also Genesis chapter 6, which it's very concise. It doesn't tell us a whole lot. The other books are needed to kind of fill in the gaps. But we're told that there was a class of angels that fell because of lust, that they had come down to be human beings. They were trying to help out human society because society needed to know how to set up a justice system and just to work. As population was growing, they needed to know these things. Well, the Watchers were supposed to help. Instead, they fell to lust. And after they fell to lust, some of the leaders of the Watchers became exceedingly corrupt, and they started giving the secrets of heaven to mankind. Maybe in trade for the women that they took to be wives. I don't know. But by giving mankind all of this information that he was never intended to have, we were launched into an era of pain and suffering because of illicit knowledge. Things that would never have happened are now happening, like weapons of warfare, astrology, the cutting of roots for mind-altering purposes, and for the purpose of controlling people through spellcraft, that kind of thing, or controlling spirits. Even jewelry and makeup and that stuff, mankind didn't know about until the Watchers gave it to us. So we're in an entirely different kind of paradigm now than we were supposed to be in at the beginning. Well, that knowledge, that increase in knowledge, led to a terrible situation in the pre-flood world, where mankind was using it to create transhumans, to mix animals and humans together. They were using it for all kinds of evil. The world was full of violence because of these things. And God said, I can't let this go on. It's like a cancer that's going to consume everything. It was going to kill the entire host. So he had to destroy that and start over. Well, you would think, okay, all that knowledge is gone. Great. Now we can start from square zero again, or square one, excuse me. But that unfortunately did not happen, because some of the people before the flood preserved the ancient knowledge. They wrote it now. There's differing stories as to how this got preserved. Some people in the occult will say it was saved on, even Josephus, I believe, writes that it was saved on these two pillars, one of metal and one of stone. Other people say it was saved in the promised land below Canaan. In fact, even below Jerusalem, if I remember correctly. And then other people say it was saved in the tunnels beneath Giza. Maybe it was in several spots. Nobody really knows, but evidently this secret knowledge was preserved, and someone found it. The Book of Jubilees says the name of the man was Canaan, but somebody or other found this knowledge after the flood, and they brought it back to the world. And then right after that happened, you see the pagan religion springing up in Mesopotamia, in southern Mesopotamia. And you see the Tower of Babel incident happening. And then there was this crazy increase in knowledge and ability. Now, most historians will kind of gloss over all the things that lead us to believe that, in fact, they were very advanced early in history after the flood. They'll say, oh, it was a gradual process. No, it wasn't gradual. It was up and down if you really look into the evidence. But eventually this stuff got dispersed around the world, and then some of it got lost, and there was a lot of wars. There was a lot of things God was doing. So there needed to be an order of specialists who could keep that information, and that's what they've done. The occultists have passed it down.
Wow. Now, do you think, now some people are going to tell, they're going to say, oh, Watchman Alexander and Mike have their tinfoil hats on at this point. But do you think that the occultists are trying to lead us or drive us back to Atlantis?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the advanced society that existed before, they want it again. They're going to drive us there no matter what. And a lot of people will probably misunderstand this, but the sciences that we have today, in large part, come from the mystery schools. What was alchemy in the past, it morphed into some of the modern day sciences, and what they called philosophy before has changed into certain sciences of the mind today. And you can actually carefully trace back through the progression of this knowledge being passed from culture to culture, from society to society. It went from Babel, southern Mesopotamia, not Babylon, but actually the early civilizations there. And when the tower was being built, and shortly thereafter, it went down to Egypt. Actually, went over to the Levant. It went down to Egypt. It went to Crete. It went up to Greece, from the Greeks going down into Egypt, and from the Greeks to the Romans, from the Romans to Europe, and then to the Americas and the rest of the world today. And we have been incredibly instrumental in spreading this enlightenment, this education, which allows us to progress so incredibly and so rapidly. This week, I saw somebody flying a hoverboard. I mean, it's incredible the age that we're living in. I never thought that would actually be possible. I grew up watching movies where people would do things like that, like The Rocketeer or Back to the Future. We're actually there now. And what that tells me is God was not kidding when he said at the Tower of Babel that because they are one people with one mind, whatever they want to do, they're going to be able to accomplish it. Saying eventually, if they put all their brains together, they're going to do anything. And that is exactly what the enemy wants us to do. He wants us to get to the point where we will be, it's so powerful, so capable with our technology that we'll actually be able to fight against Christ, the Messiah of God, that we're going to agree to battle against him, which is what we see at Armageddon. It's amazing that anyone would think that they could do that, but evidently they're going to think that in the end time, because the Antichrist is able to gather armies from around the world who will come and put up a fight against Messiah, whose sign has already been in the heavens. It says the sign of the Son of Man will appear and the whole world will see it. Okay, when they see that, that's going to be what stimulates them to gather the armies together. Okay, we're going to have to fight this guy. How could they possibly think they can fight God? Well, they think it because they're going to advance us so dramatically. We're going to not even be human anymore. That, of course, the believers will not be engaged in this, but the unbelievers are going to do the same things they were doing before the flood, as in the days of Noah. They're going to mix themselves with animals. They're going to increase their abilities with transhumanism, with robotics. I'm sure, we're seeing an explosion in robotics. So all of the efforts of the occult to continue this knowledge on, carry it on to its climax, is coming to fruition. We as believers have to be absolutely determined not to take part in this.
Wow. Good advice, Alexander. Now listen, I want you to help me out with this one. I know the meaning of this word. I might butcher its pronunciation, but it's gnosis versus trust, and that's spelled Gnosis. What that is, folks, is that's the knowledge of spiritual mysteries. How do you break that down, Alexander, between that and trust?
So one of the things that I do in Leviathan's Ruse is try to show people how there's only two ways of living. There's only two worldviews. And we tend to think that there's lots of different religions and worldviews. You've got Hinduism, polytheism, you've got Islam, you've got Mormonism, you've got Christianity, you name it, all of these different ideas. And yet, if you go down to the roots, you can really draw all of them into two categories. One category is where you're trying to elevate yourself to enlightenment or to godhood, to a state that's greater, that's evolved beyond where we are now, where we started, by your own self-efforts, by self-will. Or on the other hand, you can put that in God's hands. You can trust God and say, I cannot do that for myself. I am to be humble and say, you know what? I am just a man. I am a created being. And I have been given limitations for a purpose. God wants me to have these things, and he has a good reason for them. Just like a human child is not going to do everything that his father can do, his adult father can do. He's not supposed to. He's supposed to be a child. He's going to have boundaries that are fit for a child, not for an adult. So when we understand that, we humble ourselves and we say, God, you're boss. Daddy, you're the king. And I'm just going to wait on you. I'm going to trust you. And through your mercy, which I appeal to, you're going to fix me, fix my brokenness. You're going to fix my the problem of death, the problem of illness, all these things that we're trying now to fix with science. There's this huge push to get us beyond death and illness using the medical sciences. And there's a huge push to elevate our minds by hooking us into a collective consciousness, or by helping us with AI, and certain types of neural implants. Basically, they want to make us into the Borg, but God's way is so much better than that. And he really will raise us up to a place that's far better than we could ever get to ourselves. He is the one who can take away death and suffering, who can wipe away every tear. He is the one that can restore all things to paradise, and who can give us his love just poured out forever. The occultists, they cannot get that. There is no love. There is no light apart from God. So God is, they're just tricking people into believing that they can get this for themselves. They really can't. God is being very patient, and they have access to many of these things that are available to all of humanity right now. You know, the rain comes upon the good and the evil alike. The sunshine shines upon righteous and wicked alike. So right now they're okay, and they can do some amazing things and make some progress. But in the end, no. When God says no more, they don't have a chance. In fact, the scripture says if God said for even or stopped thinking about us and pouring out his breath of life for even a moment, that all life would perish together. So the only wise thing to do is to give ourselves over to the Father and say, my life is yours, you fix it, God, and you give me a good future. And he'll do that. But all of the other religions, even atheism, they're trying to make themselves better through their own intellect. Even Islam, which you would think would fall into the category of trusting God, it doesn't, because they have to earn God's favor through works. They have to use their self-effort to try and impress God, to try and be just good enough to, make the scales tip in their favor. And they never know whether or not it's good enough. Even when they die, they'll never know by the laws of Islam whether or not God is going to accept them. And that's a horrible way to live. It's the religion of self-effort, and I don't want any part of it.
Amen to that, brother. Amen to that. Now, last question for tonight. I know you've been at work all day and you're tired, but I want to get this one out there, Alexander. You use the Hebrew letters for God, but to basically for all of our listeners, religions view God and Lucifer.
I'm sorry, you cut out there for a second. Can you ask that question again?
How do the mystery religions view God versus Lucifer?
Okay, so yeah, I touched on that a little bit earlier, but just to repeat it, because it does need repeating. They believe that, actually, let me read you another quote that will really hit that.
The dogs, that Satan's possessing my dogs right now, so
that's all right. Okay, so there's this high-level occultist named Albert Pike. A lot of people will probably be familiar with that name. And he made a statement in his writings. He said, the true and pure philosophical religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. So he believed that, these two gods were equal, that they were warring with one another, not that Adonai was transcendent and far more powerful than all of his creatures. And then let me see if I can find this other quote where he says, well, now I'm missing it. But basically it's, if Lucifer weren't being wrongly sort of framed for this whole thing by the Abrahamic religions, then, why are they trying to calumniate him so much? In other words, when Moses wrote the Torah, what he was doing is turning it upside down and saying that, Lucifer was this bad guy, or Satan in the garden. The Nachash was this bad guy for ruining the good things that Adam and Eve had and tricking them into sinning. And that, really Adonai, and they'll point back to, the whole Old Testament, and they'll take it out of context, and they'll say, oh, Adonai was such a bad guy. He was constantly killing people, and he was this mean, vengeful God. He's oppressive. He's keeping everybody just ignorant, and really the Nakash was the one who was trying to help you guys out, and so they say he's the good one. This continues all throughout history, and we see the apostles fighting against it quite a bit in the New Testament. I mean, many of the epistles are dedicated to fighting Gnosticism. Now, Gnosticism at that time was an amalgamation of a lot of the different mystery religions that had been started throughout the ancient world. But the name of it tells you what it is. It comes from gnosis, which you said earlier, which is the knowledge or the understanding of these deep secrets. So they thought that they had the real knowledge, which is that everybody was being fooled by this Christianity thing, or by this Judeo-Christianity. And really, it was all just the opposite. And so they would deny things like Yeshua being the Son of God, even being a real prophet. And they would say the God of the Old Testament is the bad guy, and the God of the New Testament is actually Lucifer. He's actually the light bearer. He's the one who is bringing the love and all of the goodness that was lacking from Yahweh, the Old Testament God. And that Gnosticism can really be traced back through the Essenes and other occult groups in 100, 200 BC, and then back through the Greeks and all the way back to Egypt and Babel. It's really, sometimes there's gaps in the timeline because a lot of stuff got lost. There were so many wars and disasters, natural disasters and such, that caused a loss of knowledge. I mean, the Library of Alexandria is a great example. There were hundreds of thousands of scrolls, which would have contained much of the information that we would need to construct a timeline of all of this. It was all burned, almost all of it. So, things happen and we lost that stuff. But the fact is, you can mostly trace it back. And even if there wasn't an unbroken line in the human realm, it's still possible that a lot of this, that the quest, at least, if not the particulars of all of the knowledge, but the quest could have been continued through the spiritual beings, because the angels can continue to communicate with people who want to communicate with the spirit realm, which God tells us not to do, but that's what the occultists do. And they receive information from those spirits. There's a girl, actually, Jared Crestman turned me on to a pretty good example of this lady named Tracy Twyman, who's a good modern day example, because she got really into the Ouija board, and she actually modified the Ouija board to make it more effective. And she was able to communicate with a spirit that she called, oh, wow, I can't remember now, but something like the Baphomet. And this entity led her and gave her knowledge, information, and led her eventually to start gathering other people together to also have this knowledge so she could pass on what she was learning. And she did that, and she started a group, and they were learning from this being. And eventually she actually realized, and I think this is pretty rare, but she realized that this thing was having her start a mystery school, or like an occult fraternity. And when she came to that realization, I think she stopped. But it's pretty amazing to listen to her talk and just see that yeah, in fact, if you open yourself up to the spirit realm, that there are things there that are going to try and influence you, and they're going to work out their agenda as much as they can through this willing human participant. So it's possible that things got lost, but then they were informed again through that kind of activities, or arcane activity. But it's interesting. You can look back through the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Knights Templar, and back and really see how these things all piggybacked on one another. and they're taking us where they want us to go.
Yeah, that's, I mean, like, you know, they just want to take us down the path like we're a bunch of sheep, I think. I really do, Alexander. So, Alexander, how can people get a copy of Leviathan's Ruse? How do they get it?
They can go to my website, www.leviathansruse.com. That's the book site. They can also go to www.watchmanalexander.com, which is my ministry site, and that has a link to the books. And they can sign up for my newsletter on either one of those sites, which will keep them informed of the progress on the next book and some other things I'm coming out with soon, which I think are pretty exciting.
I'll tell you, folks, you really want to start following Alexander. WatchmanAlexander.com, LeviathansRuse.com. That's L-E-V as in Victor, I-A, T as in Tom, H-O-N as in Norman, S, Ruse, R-U-S-E.com. The man has some amazing research that he's doing. We're going to continue to have him on the Watchman's Report. Next week, I'm going to try and talk him into talking about the tribulation deeper. I've had several emails from folks out there that saw his last appearance on our show who were just mesmerized by his teachings. So we'll try and get him back to talk about the tribulation and other important facts that we need to know as we move into these end times. Alexander, thank you so much for joining us tonight. As always, it was a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks very much. This was great, and I hope it helped folks.
I think it did. And again, folks, WatchmanAlexander.com. That's Watchman, W-A-T-C-H-M-E-N, Alexander.com. Folks, until we see you again tomorrow here on the Watchman's Report, have a wonderful, blessed evening. I encourage you to go to Watchman Alexander tonight, do your studies, look into what's going on, be informed so you don't have to be afraid. God bless each and every one of you, and we'll talk to you tomorrow on another edition of the Watchman's Report.